steadying her. "Bring him inside," he said, voice low and steady. She looked up into eyes the color of storm clouds, gray and steady. His face was weathered, not young but not old, a few days' stubble on his jaw, and kindness marked every line. She stumbled into the cabin, past the open door he held for her. The air inside smelled of smoke and herbs. A cot sat near the hearth. She laid Kellen down, tugging the blanket up to his chin. "He's had fever near a week," she said, breath catching. "Started with a cough. I tried honey, lemon, willow bark, nothing worked." The man knelt beside the boy, touching the back of his hand to Kellen's forehead. "Name's Knox Harding," he said. "I used to ride with the Army Scouts. Learned a thing or two patching up men in worse shape than this." Willa stood back, arms crossed tight. "Willa Carrington, that's my son, Kellen," Knox nodded once. "Willa," he repeated, like it meant something to him already. "You did right bringing him here." He moved fast but careful, pulling glass jars from a shelf, dried horehound, mullein, elderflower. He crushed them with practiced hands, added hot water from the kettle, and soaked a cloth. He touched it to the boy's chest, then his forehead. Willa watched every movement. "Will this work?" she asked. Knox did not promise. He only met her eyes and said, "It has before." That night, Willa sat beside the cot, holding Kellen's hand while Knox brewed fresh tinctures by lantern light. The boy's breathing eased by inches. Willa did not speak much, just watched. Knox did not ask questions, he just stayed close. By morning, the worst of the fever had broken. Kellen stirred, eyes fluttering open. "Mama," he rasped. Willa choked on a sob and leaned in, pressing her lips to his temple. "I am here, baby. You are safe." Knox stepped back as if giving them space, but Willa turned to him. "You saved him." "Maybe," he said, voice low. "Or maybe he just needed someone to fight for him." She looked down at her son, then back at this stranger. "You have no idea what that means to me," she whispered. He gave her a small nod. "I think I do." They stayed 3 more days. Knox kept Kellen on a strict regimen: bitter teas, steam from boiled pine needles, warm compresses. Willa helped where she could, her touch soft but unsure. She had always done things alone. Lost her husband to a runaway horse 3 years ago. Buried a baby daughter the winter after. They had left Nebraska hoping for a new beginning out west. Now, in a cabin she had never seen on a map, she found something steadier than she had known in years. Knox was quiet but not closed off. He told her how he had come west after the war, how he had once had a brother who died in a mining collapse, how he had worked cattle drives and mail runs before settling here in no man's land to be left alone. "You are not alone anymore," she said one evening, her voice soft. He looked at her, long and careful. "That right," she nodded, gaze steady. "You saved my son. I do not forget something like that." He smiled, not wide but real. "I do not want you to forget." By the 7th night, Kellen was sitting up, eating broth and bread. He was thin, but color had returned to his cheeks. He leaned into Knox when the man handed him a carved wooden horse. "I made it a while ago," Knox said. "Had no one to give it to," Kellen beamed. "I like it." Willa watched them from the doorway, arms folded. The wind had settled. The air had turned cool. Knox came to stand beside her. "He is strong. He is everything," Willa said, her voice thick. "And you gave him back to me." Knox shook his head. "You never gave up on him. That is what saved him." She turned to him, close now. "I do not know how to repay you." He looked at her, and for once nothing stood between them, not fear, not grief, not the long road behind. "Stay," he said, voice low. "You and Kellen, stay here," her breath caught. "You mean it?" "I have nothing to offer but this land, this cabin, and what is in my heart, but I want you here." Willa reached up, her hand grazing his jaw. "You have already given me more than anyone ever has," and when he kissed her, it was not rushed or wild. It was steady and warm, like hands finding each other in the dark and holding on. Kellen peeked out the cabin door, grinned, and said, "Are you going to be my pa now?" Knox laughed, full and hoarse and surprised. "If your mama lets me." Willa pulled Knox close, her smile quiet and sure. "I think she just might." The first frost came quietly, threading silver through the sagebrush and stiffening the pump handle outside Knox's cabin. Willa woke early, the quilt pulled halfway down her shoulder, the cot across the room empty. She sat up, heart thudding, until she saw Kellen by the hearth, small hands outstretched toward the fire. Knox crouched beside him, showing how to place the kindling without smothering the flame. "You got to leave air underneath," Knox said, laying a longer stick across the base. "Fire breathes same as us." Kellen nodded solemnly, eyes bright. "I like the way it smells." Willa wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and crossed the room. "He's never built a fire before." Knox glanced up. Figured he ought to know how. "Cold's coming early this year." She crouched beside them. "You think it'll snow soon?" "Could. Winds are changing." "Wouldn't hurt to bring in more wood, get the roof checked. Storm'll test every weak spot." They moved through the day together, unspoken rhythm growing between them. Knox showed Kellen how to oil hinges and patch cracks along the baseboards. Willa took inventory of everything in the small pantry: dried beans, flour, lard, salt pork, a few jars of pickled carrots. She made a list of what they'd need before winter settled in. That afternoon, Knox hitched his sorrel gelding and rode west toward a trading post near Rawlins. Willa watched him go from the porch, arms crossed against the chill. Kellen leaned against her side, wordless. "He'll be back before dusk," she said, brushing his hair back. "I know," Kellen said. "He said he'd bring me a little slate." "He did," Kellen nodded. "Said I could use it to practice letters. He said he'd teach me." She looked down at her boy, thinner than he'd been but steadier now, eyes clearer. "You'd like that," he shrugged, trying not to show too much. "He knows lots of things. It's easy to listen to him." Willa didn't answer. The sky was deepening blue, the wind soft but insistent. She went back inside and stirred a pot of beans, letting them simmer low while Kellen napped. By dusk, Knox returned with sacks slung across the back of his saddle. A small slate with a wooden frame poked out of one. He handed it to Kellen without comment, and the boy clutched it like treasure. Later, over cornbread and beans, Willa said, "You didn't have to do that." Knox wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Didn't seem like much. He's quick. Picks things up faster than most grown men I've met." She set down her fork, voice quiet. "You talk to him like he's worth listening to. Not many do." Knox didn't look away. "He is." After supper, Knox stepped outside to check the sky. Willa followed, drawing her shawl tighter. The moon hung low above the hills, clouds drifting thin and slow. "You been on your own a long while," Knox said, not turning. "I have. Hard getting used to someone else in your space." She looked at his profile, the line of his jaw against the moonlight. "It's not the space that's hard. It's wondering if it's real, if it'll last." He was quiet a long time. Then, "I don't take in people unless I mean to keep them." Willa took a step closer. "And do you mean to keep us?" Knox turned to her, eyes darker than the sky. "If you'll stay," her breath caught, "I will. If I can help earn our place here." "You already have. You keep things running, you see what's needed before I say it." She looked down. "I can sew, I can mend things, I know how to dry apples for winter." Knox reached for her hand, his fingers rough and warm. "I don't need someone to prove they belong, I just need someone who stays." Willa's throat tightened. "Then you have us." He drew her hand to his chest, just over his heart. She felt its steady beat. "I've been waiting a long time," he murmured. "So have I," she said, and leaned in. That night, with Kellen asleep in the corner and the fire low, Willa curled against Knox in the narrow bed. No words passed between them, just breath and warmth shared beneath the quilt. And in the hush of the Wyoming night, something settled like a door long closed had finally opened. In the morning, snow would dust the ground. But for now, there was only the quiet, and the feel of belonging wrapped around them like the first light of dawn. By late October, the days shortened and the air settled cold into the bones of the valley. The cottonwoods along the creek had turned brittle gold, and when the wind stirred them, their leaves fell in waves like coins from a torn purse. Willa stood at the edge of the root cellar, apron dusted in flour, watching Knox haul the last of the squash from the slope behind the barn. His coat was patched near the elbow, and the knees of his trousers showed where he knelt to tend the soil. She hadn't asked him to plant extra, but he had, weeks back, and now she saw why. Inside, Kellen was tracing letters on his slate, tongue caught between his teeth in concentration. A short stack of firewood sat by the hearth, and a line of peeled apples dried along the string she had strung across the ceiling beam. The rhythm of the place had settled into something that didn't need naming. It just was. Knox dropped the basket at her feet and straightened, wiping his hands on his pants. Frost'll finish the rest by morning. Willa bent to pick one of the smaller squash from the pile. I can bake these with molasses, maybe mash some with lard. Kellen's been eating better. He won't say it, but he's fond of your stew. I noticed, Knox said and reached for another basket. I'll check the fence line after this. Coyotes have been nosing near the henhouse. Willa hesitated, then ran her thumb across the smooth skin of the squash. I've been thinking about what comes next. Knox paused, waiting. I never planned to stop moving. After my husband died, I kept telling myself there had to be something better ahead, but now, she looked up at him. Now I don't want to leave. You don't have to, I know. But staying's not just about surviving the winter, it's something else. She brushed her hand along her apron, suddenly unsure how to say what sat in her chest. I want to make a life that's not built on running. Knox nodded slowly. Then let's build one. She blinked, startled at how simply he'd said it. Just like that? No, he said. Not just like that, but step by step, together. That evening, Knox brought in a tan deer hide he'd cured behind the shed. He laid it across the table and Kellen ran his hand over the soft suede. What are you gonna make with it? The boy asked. Winter boots. Maybe a vest for you if I've enough left after. You know how to do that, Knox gave a short nod. My brother taught me. He used to trap in the Wind Rivers. I picked it up watching him stitch through the long, dark months. Willa sat by the fire, mending the hem of a petticoat with a thread she'd unraveled from an old flour sack. Will you show me how? Kellen asked. Knox looked to Willa first, then back to the boy. You got the patience for learning. I think so. Then we'll start tomorrow. Later, after Kellen had fallen asleep curled in the quilt Knox had draped over him, Willa set down her needle and walked to the door where Knox stood, watching the wind stir the treetops. You were close to your brother, she said. He didn't answer right away. He was older, quieter than me, died in a shaft collapse east of Laramie. He'd gone in after a man with a busted leg. Tunnel held just long enough for him to get the man out. Willa reached for his hand, folding her fingers through his. You never told me that. He turned toward her, face unreadable in the firelight behind them. I didn't know if it mattered. It does, she said. It shows what kind of men raised each other. He held her gaze for a long moment before letting their hands fall between them. I didn't think I'd get another chance to care for someone, not like this. You have that chance now, she said. Knox stepped closer. And I want it. She didn't answer with words. She reached for him, pulled him down into the warmth of her kiss, slow, certain, no fear left between them. That night she lay beside him in the narrow bed, his arm a steady weight across her waist. The air outside had turned bitter, but the cabin held warmth enough. Willa closed her eyes, listening to the quiet breathing of her son, the even rhythm of Knox's heart behind her, and felt something she hadn't known in years. She was home. The first heavy snow settled over the valley with a hush that pressed against the cabin walls. It clung to the pine boughs and drifted deep along the fence line, muting the world into a soft, white stillness. Knox rose before the light came through the frost-laced windows, pulling on his coat and wrapping burlap around his boots before heading out to check the livestock. Willa watched him go from the doorway, steam curling from the tin mug in her hands. Inside, Kellen sat cross-legged near the hearth, carefully copying numbers into the corner of his slate. He paused now and then to glance at the fire, as if weighing how long before it needed stoking. Willa crossed the room and tousled his hair without a word, then knelt to add another log. By midday, Knox returned with a scrape along his cheek and snow crusted to his collar. You all right? Willa asked, drawing him toward the warmth. Gate near the creek collapsed under the weight, he said, brushing ice from his shoulders. One of the ewes wandered loose. Took near an hour to coax her back with the wind howling. She pulled a tin of lard salve from the shelf and dabbed his cheek gently, her touch quick but steady. "I'll mend the gate tomorrow," he said, voice low. "Need to cut new rails first." "There's a stack of dry pine under the lean-to," Willa said. "You can take Kellen if the snow settles. He's been restless." Knox glanced past her. "Think he's up to that. He's stronger than he lets on." Knox didn't argue. That evening, Willa stood at the table rolling dough with the heel of her hand while Knox sharpened a draw knife. Kellen sat on a stool, swinging his legs and watching them both with an expression Willa couldn't name. "Why don't you ever talk about your folks?" he asked, voice light but curious. Knox looked up, blade paused mid-draw. "Not much to say." "You had a ma, though, right?" Knox set the tool down and leaned back. "She died when I was about your age. Fever took her fast. My brother raised me after that." Willa turned the dough once, careful not to speak too soon. "Did he teach you how to build things?" Kellen asked. "He taught me how to keep things from falling apart." Kellen nodded like he understood, then looked at Willa. "Did your ma ever bake pies?" Willa smiled faintly. "She made one every Sunday, blackberry, even in winter. She'd dry the berries in summer and store them in a flour sack." "Maybe we can do that next year," he said. Knox met her eyes across the table, and something passed between them, quiet, certain. "We will," she said. After supper, Knox brought out a cedar box with brass hinges. He set it before Willa and stepped back. "It was my brother's," he said. "He kept maps and letters in it. I reckon it ought to hold something that still matters." Willa lifted the lid slowly. Inside, folded linen, a handful of pressed wildflowers, and a photograph, edges worn, corners curling. A younger Knox stood beside a man with the same eyes but a sharper jawline. Behind them, distant ridges stretched beneath an open sky. "I didn't know you had this," she said. "I didn't know when to show it." She looked up. "And now feels right." She reached across the box and took his hand. That night, as Kellen slept with his slate tucked beneath the cot, Knox and Willa sat together near the fire, her head resting against his shoulder. Outside, the snow deepened in silence. Inside, the warmth held. "You reckon we'll make it through the winter all right?" she asked quietly. Knox's arm tightened around her. "We already are." The last week of November brought a wind so dry and sharp it lifted the snow into thin whirls and cut through every seam in the cabin's walls. Willa stuffed wool scraps into the worst of the cracks and tied a second shawl around Kellen's shoulders when he sat too long near the door. The boy had taken to reading aloud in a slow, halting rhythm, sounding out words from the old primer Knox had traded for in Rollins. Knox listened as he split kindling by the hearth, offering only a quiet almost, or try it again when Kellen stumbled. That morning, Willa stepped into the shed behind the cabin and stood among the hanging tools and drying hides, searching for the basket of clipped thread she'd left weeks ago. She found it tucked behind a pair of worn gloves and carried it back inside, where a pile of scrap fabric waited on the table. Knox watched her as she sorted through the cloth, brow furrowed. "You starting something?" She nodded, not looking up. "A quilt. I've been meaning to. I've got pieces from Kellen's old shirts and the hem I cut off that blue dress. Thought I'd stitch it through the winter." Knox stepped closer, quiet a long moment. "You ever make one before? My grandmother taught me. Said quilts hold stories, even when no one writes the words down." He ran a hand along the back of a chair, fingers brushing the wood. "I'd like to see what kind of story yours tells." She smiled at that, small and to herself. Days passed in slow routines, mending boots, boiling the last of the root vegetables, melting snow to drink when the pump froze. Knox began carving a small cradle from pine, working slowly on the porch when the light stretched long enough. Willa didn't ask why at first, but she watched the shape of it change day by day, rounded slats, smooth joints, no nails. One night, after Kellen had drifted off with his head against her lap, Willa looked across the firelight at Knox. His hands were still, resting on his knees, and his eyes were fixed on the cradle frame leaning against the far wall. "You planning for someone?" she asked. He looked up, met her gaze. "I'm planning for what comes next." She didn't answer right away. Her hand settled over Kellen's shoulder, protective but at ease. "You think that's something we could have?" "I do, if that's what you want." She looked at him fully then, something in her face softening. "I think I stopped wanting things for a long time, didn't seem safe, but this is different." Knox rose and crossed the room, crouching beside her. His voice was low but sure. "I want a family here, not just a roof and chores and days strung together, but a life with you, with him. And whatever else comes." She reached for him slowly, her fingers brushing his jaw, then resting there. "You already have us." At the first thaw in early March, Willa and Knox stood with Kellen between them beneath a bare-limbed cottonwood, the stream trickling again beneath thin ice. A traveling preacher out of Fort Steele had arrived on a borrowed mule, his coat threadbare but his voice steady as he read the words that bound them. Willa wore a dress she'd let down at the hem, and Knox had shaved clean that morning, though his hair still curled stubborn at the collar. Kellen held the rings, solemn as a judge, and handed them over without a word. Afterward, they shared stew and cornbread at the table, and the preacher rode off before dusk. That night, Willa stood at the threshold, her shawl wrapped tight, watching the sky turn amber over the hills. Knox stepped behind her, arms circling her waist. "I never thought I'd feel this again," she whispered. "What?" he asked, voice against her hair. "Safe." He turned her gently in his arms. "You are. And you always will be." She leaned into him, and they stood like that until the last of the light faded. Years passed steady as the seasons. Willa's quilt grew heavy with Story's scraps from Kellen's new shirts. A piece of the dress she wore when she wed, the corner of an old handkerchief from the preacher who married them. She stitched through winters, taught Kellen to read with more ease, and in time to write his own name in a firm, square hand. Knox built a second room onto the cabin the following spring with windows that caught the morning sun. Willa filled it with baskets and dried herbs and laughter. By the time the cradle was needed, it had been polished smooth and lined with a blanket Willa had sewn from the softest of her scraps. Their daughter, born in the quiet of a late summer night, had hair dark as river stones and her father's calm gaze. Kellen, now taller and steadier, carried her with the care of someone who knew what it meant to lose and find again. They named her Ruth, after Willa's grandmother.